In this video, we'll be creating CRUD functionality in Spring Boot with HTMX and Thymeleaf. To demonstrate what we'll be creating today, here I am going to create a new post. Click the Create Post button, and notice we're on the HTMX/post endpoint. And if I go to Edit, it will bring up this UI component for us, and then I can give it an exclamation mark. I can update the post, and I can also go ahead and delete the post. And notice how we're getting that single page application functionality. We're on the same URL, and that's what HTMX integrated with our template engine will do for us. But we can do all of this through Spring Boot. So it's pretty cool that we can get that sort of basic front-end functionality through our HTMX and without writing any JavaScript code. So let's go ahead and look at how we can do this. The first thing we want to do is we want to get a dependency. So we want to get the Thymeleaf dependency. That's the template engine, and that's sort of used more than JSP pages these days. So we can go to our application properties, and we can go ahead and we can just bring in the things we want. So notice that our templates, we've got this templates folder within resources. This is where we're going to have our Thymeleaf files. And of course, we're looking for the standard HTML files, and we don't want to do any caching. And this is just for debugging purposes if you want to check the template. So what we want to do here is we've got this folder structure here. We've got the index.html file, and we're also going to bring in Tailwind. So the index, this is going to be like the wrapper, the HTML wrapper with all the standard tags. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a layout component. So this will be the header HTML, or a fragment they call them. And then we're going to have the blog page itself, which will show all of the posts, and we'll also have that edit form we just saw before. So that will be rendered within the index page. So if we look at the index page here, we create the boilerplate HTML, but just notice that we have this extra property here to signify that we're using the Thymeleaf template engine. And then what we want to do is we'll say, give this a title, and we have this th text title here. So this $ curly braces, this is how you do variables in Thymeleaf. And what we're going to do is we're going to set that value through a controller when we get the page, because when we get the page, we're going to give back the index page, and it's going to know to render the other pages or components within this. So we got this th text property, and this between the tags here, this is the default property. So if the title is not set for whatever reason for the particular page that we're trying to request, then we give the default value back. So what we want to do is we just bring in the CDN for Tailwind, and we also get the HTMX code. And of course, if you're doing this for real, you'd probably want to use the static resources here and actually have the files directly. But we're just going to reference it like that for here. So of course, we can just have a standard body tag in our wrapper HTML page. And the first thing you'll probably see that may be unfamiliar is this line here. So what this is doing, this is how we can replace this div with our header component. So just to show you the header component, or the header fragment, we name it like this, th fragment header. And then we just got some basic header on here. So this is just Tailwind classes, and this will just be the top navigation button. But notice that we have this th fragment header here, and that fragment corresponds with this header after the double colon. And this part here, the layout/header, that corresponds to the relative path of it from the templates folder. So by default, it's expected to look into the templates folder. So it just looks into the layout folder and it looks at the header file, and you don't need to put the HTML extension at the end because it'll just know to do that because we configured it to be HTML as the suffix. So what we have here is we have a slightly different syntax to this here because there's a difference between the static and the dynamic content. Title is just a static thing we set. This is actually referencing a header, and we'll see more details about that when we go into the controller and set it for the page. So then what we do is we want to display the all posts. So all posts, what that's going to be is we're going to start with the simple GET request. So we're going to display the list of these blog posts, and then we'll add in the functionality to post the blog post, which will be this form at the top and the create post button. Then after that, we'll have the functionality for delete set up. We'll implement that. And then finally, we'll set up the functionality for the edit form to appear, and we can update that, and that will update our template for us. So starting with the page that we're going to render, we want to render the all posts, as I mentioned, for the post here. So what we want to do is we want to create a fragment for the all post section, and right now we'll just have this h2 for the blog post, which will just be at the top here. So what we can do is we can do a switch statement. So basically what we have here is if the content, which is a variable that we haven't set yet, but we'll set it on the controller level, if that is going to be equal to all posts, so you make an API request to an endpoint, and in that endpoint in the controller, we'll be able to detect if that particular method is supposed to have some variable set on the model called all posts. And if that is true, similar to how we got this th replace here, we have the same sort of syntax. So what we can do is we could look into the blog, into the all post HTML fragment, and we can go ahead and we can render that all posts here, which you can once again see in the th fragment. However, if that isn't the endpoint we're getting, but we're sort of rendering an index page, we can have this fallback. So we can have this th case, and there's just a simple paragraph that says no matching content. So let's take a look at the all post component. And I keep saying component, and really that's a single page application term. However, since we're using HTMX, we sort of can simulate that functionality, and it's really nice to be able to do that on the back end without writing much JavaScript, if any, at all. So what we do is we just create a post list div here. So this is just going to be the Tailwind classes. We have this ID of the post list. This is important. We need to remember this because when we update the page, we need to refer to the certain IDs. So another thing that might stick out is this th each. This is just the way we can loop through each of the posts. So you can see we have 2 posts here. We just, for each of those, we spit out a paragraph. And then once again, we have this th text here. So that's going to be the text of the actual post itself. And notice that none of them say post content. This is once again a fallback. So if there was nothing in here, this was null, this would then be the fallback value there. So we've just created a list here. And actually, before I get into the form, I want to create the controller. So here we just have a regular controller. I've called it post HTMX controller, and I've injected the post service, which we've seen in the previous video. But that's just basic CRUD functionality if you haven't seen the previous video. I'm just going to get all these imports that should auto import for you. And then I'm going to create the GET request. Now, one thing to note is you need to have @controller rather than a @REST controller, because a REST controller, it's expecting a JSON response. However, we're given back a page. So here you can see that in the mapping, so we're mapping to HTMX/post, which is what we've got here. What we're doing is we're actually returning the whole index page. So the whole index page so far, it's going to be all of this HTML plus the header component fragment and also the all post lists that we've written so far. And you can see here that we've got this title variable here. This corresponds to the adding the attribute title here on the model. So you can just put model in as a parameter in the signature, and then when you actually make use of that, you can have this add attribute method title, and then that can give it the value here of blog page, which is different to my blog here. And if we would actually inspect the code here and look at the title, which will be in the head, we can see that we have blog page here. So that's not my blog. It's the variable here that overwrit the default here. So similarly, we have content here, and we are expecting to have the all post content page. So we set the content to this all post string here, and then we just check for the string equality. So we have these extra quotes in here. So if that's the case, then we just render the all post fragment from the particular file with the fragment name of the all posts here. And finally, we need all of our data that we're going to render. So we use the post service to get all the posts, and then we just set that as a model attribute. And then you can see here, when we're doing this each loop through the post, we can use this post variable here to get all of those. And then for each individual post, we're rendering out that content. So let's take a look at the add functionality now. So we need to create a form, and this is where we'll start to get into a little bit of the HTMX stuff. So HTMX is a way to sort of do partial updates on this. We'll make requests. You can make non-get requests in your UI to your server, and it's possible to reference certain elements and have some sort of interactivity there. So it's important to note that there is JavaScript actually working behind the scenes, but you don't really have to use it. You can just use these HTML tags, and they'll do some of the functionality or interactivity for you. Now, if your application is very heavy on interactivity, you wouldn't want to be necessarily using HTMX. You'd probably want a single page application or meta framework like React or Next or Angular or something like that. So, but if you have something that you just need a little bit of interactivity, but you want the SEO, you can, and you're a backend developer as well, you can just, or you prefer just writing backend code because you get type safety and all that stuff. You can have your well-structured backend code. You can have a little bit of your HTML. You can generate some Tailwind components and all that sort of stuff. And then you can just put on a couple of these tags, and you can get that little bit of interactivity. So let's say you had a blog, you could have really good SEO because you've got server rendered content, but then you might have, say, like a form at the bottom with an email sign up, something like that. And then you could now have that without any issues, and you could get that interactivity that you needed for having a little bit of interactivity. So the way HTMX works is basically you still have IDs on elements. So we're creating this create post form, and we got this post list here. HTMX prefix with this HX dash, and then there's post, delete, get, all of that, and they just signify the API methods. So what we want to do is we want to make a API request to HTMX, and when I say API request, it's our server, so we're rendering it from our server. So what we want to do is we want to create a post method, and upon receiving data, we want to re-render the list. So you can imagine if you have a form, you're going to have a button, and when you write something in here and you click create post, what you want that to do is we want to have all of the existing posts and then alongside with the new post. So the way we can do that is we can actually target the element that we want. So we have this post list, and if we target that, we can go ahead and we can swap the inner content that we get back from this post request into the post list element. So that means we need to return all of the posts, including the new one. So what we do is we just create a basic text area. So we've got somewhere to write, give it the ID of post text and a label post text. That's just this UI part here. Then we give it a bit of styling, and then we create a submit button. So this is just Tailwind styling once again. And then we've got this create post. So now we have a button to be able to actually make this request. So what we can do is we can come to our post HTMX controller. We can create a post mapping. We'll call it create post. This will take the text, and see how we have the request parameter text here. This corresponds to the name here in this text area. So we can get that. There's some HTMX tags that can detect that upon submit and upon a post request. So the post request will receive that text. And then once again, like all of these, we have the model. So what we do is we can just create a new post. So the ID is auto-generated. So we can just go ahead and set the text. And we can just go ahead and we can just create the post. So using the post service, then what we want to do is we just want to get all the posts. So we can just get all of the posts. This will include the new post that we just created. And then what we do is we add the model attribute post, similarly to how we did it in get, and this will just update our UI for us. And then what we do, rather than returning the index, we return the post list fragment for the blog or post. So this means that we don't need to re-render the whole index page. What this will do is it's going to sort of render, it's going to target the all posts. So it's going to look at this page here, it's going to give it back, but it's specifically not going to do it for everything, but it's specifically doing it for the post list. So the post list, which we have here, that's the thing that renders each of these posts out. So that's the only thing we need to change. So that's why we have the ID to reference it, and we can just partially update this UI with that, and then that's how we get the SPA-like functionality, which is pretty nice. It's pretty nice to be able to do that from the back end. So that's the create post. Let's have a look at the the delete post. So I'm creating a div here, and there's going to be two things in here. These are these buttons on the next row after the text here, edit and delete. I'll start with delete. So what we should do here is we just create a Tailwind component, and it's going to have a button. So one thing to note is when it comes to doing non-get requests with Thymeleaf, you can often run into issues. So here we got this HTMX post here, and that's all well and fine, just because of the way it's set up with this button in the form. So the form is like the traditional way to have server rendered things. However, if we have just the button by itself, notice that Thymeleaf, it has like all these cross-scripting measures that it puts into place. So you're sort of, in a sense, fighting against the Thymeleaf template engine for some of the non-get requests. So, but what we can do is, rather than having HTMX delete directly, what we can do is we can have the th attribute, so the Thymeleaf attribute, and then we give it the HTMX delete, and then we just need to escape the characters that we have there. So this is just going to go to HTMX post ID, and then you also need to reference what the ID is. So since we're in a loop, we have access to the particular ID that we want, so we can pass that ID into here. That's what we're expecting to delete, and we need this because it needs to match the endpoint. So that's one thing to keep in mind when using a template engine in conjunction with HTML, is sometimes some of the non-get requests need to escape some of the syntax, because they may deem it as unsafe, and that's how we can sort of prevent cross-site scripting without thinking about it too much. It's just relying on that. So once again, when we delete something, it's going to remove something from the list, so we can target that post list that we're rendering out here, and we can have this HTMX swap, where it's sort of swapping the inner HTML. So that just means from the response that we get, which is going to be the new list, it's going to replace everything that's within this post list with the new post. And that's exactly what we want. So that's the delete button. The delete button's pretty simple. Yeah, basically what we're doing here is we can get that and pass it to the edit post form here. So one thing to note is when we create our ID edit, our get requests, what we're doing is we're getting a single post and we're adding the model attribute post rather than posts. So what we want to do is we actually return the edit post form, which we're about to create in a new file, and then very specifically the edit form container, which is this top level thing. So we're going to have the ability to type in we're going to have this text area here, edit post text here, and the text is going to be the post text, so they'll just be put in there for us. And then we have a submit button, so that will update the post. So notice that the HTMX target once again is the post list, because when we edit something we need to re-render the post list part, and we'll swap the HTML that we get back from our patch request into the actual all post section. So the way this is going to work is we're going to need to have a patch method here where we take the ID and we pass in the ID, of course, and the new text that we want. So we can get the existing post and then we can set the new text on that, and then we can update it, and then we can get all of the posts, and then we can return the all posts, the post list to the all posts part of the page. So that's all well and good. But one final thing is, notice that we're not actually toggling the close functionality here. So how do you close this? Well, you can do it a couple of ways. One other way would be to, if you weren't using Thymeleaf, it would be a lot easier to do. They have like these triggers, so you could do something like HX on, and then you could do something like, you need to look into the documentation, but just to mention, it's like an after request, and then you could actually write like, you know, you could just write like a little bit of inline JavaScript to close it. So you could do like document get ID for this edit post form and just close it. So I'm not going to do that. But what I will do is I'll just write a little bit of JavaScript just to show you that you can still use JavaScript if you want to do all the things you want to do. The other issue is sometimes with these template engines like Thymeleaf, having, like, you can see that rather than having the HX patch attribute directly on here, which is what we would want, you sort of got to escape it. Sometimes you have a little bit of a fight between the template engine and the HTMX, so it can make it difficult to do some of those basic things easier enough. And when you have to start writing stuff like this and you just want a little bit of JavaScript to code it, sometimes it can be easy just to write it out. Even though we're trying to avoid JavaScript, it is using JavaScript under the hood. It's just something to keep in mind. So basically, this is what we want to do. We can add an event listener. So after a request is done, and you could write this in the HX on as well if you escape it properly. If the target ID is post list here, so if we just look at this form here, see that the target's post list, and then there's a patch request, and there's other lifecycle events you could look into in the documentation, like before and all this sort of stuff, before request. Make sure you're getting the timing right of things. But after we make this HX patch request and there's a change to the post list, basically what we can do is we can say, well, we can get the edit post form, just raw JavaScript, which is here, and recall that when we click the update button that this form will show up at the bottom to update it. And what we want to do is we just want to clear it back. So we just want to clear everything that's inside it, because the edit post form gets injected when we click the update button. So we just go ahead and we just set in the HTML back to an empty string. And that's everything. So just to demonstrate one more time. Hello. This is create the post. You can edit the post, add an exclamation mark, all on the same endpoint, and delete it, refresh the page, and everything's all good. So that's how you can use HTMX with Thymeleaf and Spring Boot. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next video.